All right, well, welcome back to the Stanford AI and Healthcare podcast series. I'm Matt Lundgren, and I'm joined by Justin Norden. And today's guest is probably familiar with most of our listeners, Seth Hain, who's the Senior Vice President of R&D at Epic. He has been at Epic a whopping 20 years, focused on technology, AI, and applications there. Fun fact about Seth, I've gotten to know him a little bit over the last couple years. As a math major, he's obviously brilliant and a brilliant technologist. But as a card-carrying English major myself, he is a prolific reader, and I find more often than not that his book suggestions are way better than mine. So clearly, God has given with both hands in terms of talent to our guests today. We're excited to have you on the show. Welcome, Seth.
Thank you, Matt. It's good to see you both.
So we have some topics, I think, to tee up as usual. I think we typically try to get to just like where are we at least at the point of recording in this exponential world we're living in. And I know a lot of folks in the audience are a little different than us in the sense that they don't obsessively follow a lot of this. So Justin, I don't know if you have some of the latest. So GPT-5 has launched. I think a lot of folks maybe had a mixed response, let's say, at least in relationship to the hype leading up to 5. We can get into some nuance there. I'm curious to hear your take on this, but from the healthcare AI lens, once again, it's kind of saturating these typical benchmarks. So I don't know, Justin and Seth, you've seen this kind of data over and over and over again, where we're using some of these benchmarks. We can get into that, but first impressions of 5, thoughts around how are you using the models today? Has anything changed for you with the latest release?
First impressions on five. It makes me laugh because every time one of these models comes out, the very first thing I do is I give it to my son, who is 14 years old, and I ask him if it can build the magic deck that he was always dreamt of for him. And unfortunately, we still haven't cracked that nut. So I think there's still a ways to go. I think the USMLE benchmarks it's doing better on than my son's magic benchmark, which is my
Those are
current
the two that you
gauge.
track.
Those are the two I track. That's exactly
Has he,
right.
but the big question is has he made a magic card with your skills and stats? Like does he have his own personalized deck with the
He,
parents?
he is starting high school. He's avoiding parents at this point in time.
Smart, probably smart move, yes.
Yeah, we'll steer clear of that at the moment. I have found that I spend a lot of time, you brought up GPT-5 specifically, using the thinking and pro models, right? I think that there's sort of two tiers of usage of it. Folks are pretty excited to see what can happen with these reasoning models, and I think many folks are getting exposure to it for the first time. Um, but I think the opportunity to know consistently you're going to get the high quality output with like either the thinking or the pro obviously doing more with a little more latency tends to be my usage patterns these days. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, and I think, and we've seen also some in the comments people ask, Matt in AGI camp, this is the next thing. I'll say I was kind of in more of the rest of the internet of, hey, it is better. I think it is a very interesting consumer choice to do some of the routing behind the scenes to kind of expose people to different models. I don't know if it was the Death Star giant leap forward that some people were predicting. So there's a separate question on, again, what is the rate of change? How much better are these models getting? So I think was it the exponential, from 3 to 4, like, no, like to be super clear, I think at least not from my own experience there. But then the other, interesting, there's, again, it's not just that's come out since our last. There's, Seth, to your point on, magic cards, and is your son gonna make one for you? There's, Gemini, nano banana and image models and other more specialized models coming out that aren't just in this, hey, bigger models. And so I think to me, this is just kind of this broader theme of model selection, specialized models, and other things. And I know we're going to get to this topic, later with Seth, some of the announcements around some of the Cosmos pieces. But I think that's just another thing for I am watching as a field as I see these models come out.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like, definitely we track maybe almost pathologically too much the models, but I would say that I was one of the rare people that liked having choice, a bunch of
Yeah.
different models to choose from, um, and I maybe was also one of the rare people that liked 4.5. And for those in the audience who didn't know, that was kind of this middle step model, but really great at writing. And just was felt much more natural, at least to me. But yeah, I think that it depends on your starting point. Like if you were someone that was a casual user, a dabbler, and you weren't even using some of the thinking models, and now all of a sudden you're asking a question and you're getting this really, quote unquote intelligent response that was the result of a thinking model, as opposed to the typical, 4.0 response. I think you will be wowed, and maybe it would feel like a Death Star, whatever the hype is. But to your point, like I think the incremental increase, we're getting to a place where I just don't know if I have hard enough questions to really tease out the true difference. And so again, we look at these benchmarks in healthcare. Obviously, I have felt pretty solid about, putting my own healthcare data. We've had this discussion before, and not feeling like compared to the original four and certainly 3.5, where it's wildly off. It feels, in fact, I'm learning things. I feel like that I continuously validate myself, but I'm still like, wow, it really is impressive. I do feel like though on the benchmark side, we are kind of drifting away from being able to rely on those to give us information that's useful in our daily lives.
I think one of the things on the benchmark side, it's interesting that we continue to use benchmarks that are founded in kind of the education system, if you will, from a medical perspective. And we haven't quite figured out how do we move into those later stages of a clinician's journey as they become better and better in the role and move out of school. And I think it's an important benchmark. It's something we need to keep watching, but I think there's other modalities and there's other approaches here we need to start tapping into and thinking through.
Yeah, and actually, one of the other recent papers, and I'll pull up the chart here, was there are serious problems with multiple choice questions as kind of the only benchmark. And this was a study done from a colleague at Stanford, Nigam Shah's lab, that showed even if you just change
Yeah.
none of the other answers from the right answer, performance dropped, right? And so like there are issues, and we were just talking about getting a consistent response also to these things. Remember, these LLMs are non-deterministic, and so there are issues to work through really as we think about performance, then how we're evaluating these systems.
I think one of the things that is often challenging between this type of research, which I think is important and often informs, for example, types of development paths we take here in regards to prompting and other pieces, is that it doesn't represent the way that we build software consistently, right? We know when we're creating, say, a summary for a physician in the context of the ED that has a patient presenting in a certain circumstance, that there are a series of checks and balances you need to go through in regards to creating that summarization in the context, and then also using things like citations back to other parts of the medical record to help account for the quality in those contexts. And it's unclear to me how one starts to replicate that in the academic literature in a consistent manner. So I think that's one of the reasons I was excited to come on the podcast because I think this type of dialogue needs to continue to happen between both industry and academia in many ways because we can keep learning more from each other.
Well, and I think you're raising a really important point. I think, we can park the idea of like the models broadly, and again at a place like Epic, which is famously engineer, the prototype of practically your entire workforce is as an engineer. So there are clearly advantages, and I'd love to hear your perspective just on using some of those tools. And you hear some hyperbole about percentages of code written by AI assisted models, whatever. But if you just go back into the physician use case, it's an incredibly good. I feel like we've gotten enough signal from the models with the benchmarks and some of the anecdotal use that they have capabilities that are useful for real things in healthcare. The question is that you're raising is like, okay, now that we know their signal, how do we actually craft that into something that really delivers something for our
Yeah.
end users, whether it's a patient or physician? And that gap to me is still a bit of a chasm and does require the hard work of either having the domain expertise, the tight developer user interactions, and frankly, just the know-how of how to stitch these things together. And that I think there's an overhang. We talk about the overhang a lot.
Yeah.
Capabilities are here. Getting those into the real world to show that value is still going to be messy work that will take time.
Well, and I think, first off, you got to make sure you're asking a meaningful question when you're designing a solution, right? What is, and this is, I don't know, it's probably cliche at this point, but I mean, we deeply believe that every developer needs to get on site through some, we call it immersion here, but you've got to spend time at the elbow with the physician, understanding what are the problems you're trying to solve. And in some cases, these are kind of diagnostic type questions about labs. In those cases, in many of the contexts, it's an administrative question. And I think you've got to start by asking the right question. And then to your point, there's this question of how do you build up the right pipeline? How do you build up the right back-end structures, both in regards to monitoring and ongoing kind of reinforcement loops for improving the back-end process for whatever you're generating, be it a summary, be it a draft of a note, um, be it a SQL query for putting real-world evidence at the point of care. And I think that is starting to mature. I think the thing that there's a lot of opportunity to spend time talking about and continuing to think through is what are the new user experience patterns, those design workflows, particularly where having the models think longer continues to improve the outcome. But now we're not in this instantaneous, I have an answer in under a second question, but it might be worth waiting for. And I think that there's a important conversation to be had on that front that's coming in the industry, and we're just starting to tip into.
We could talk about nothing else but that, right? And I think it's what's fascinating right now is right. We were just talking about model selection. At OpenAI, there was a lot of backlash on taking that away and forcing people to an instant response versus thinking. Um, we haven't solved it there. We also haven't solved it in healthcare as we think about higher risk interactions and latency for certain pieces of data, being able to wait for others. Um, and then I think the points you're bringing up, Seth, on just software and building software, the way I describe it often when I'm talking to people in healthcare is if you want something that is reliable, consistent, high quality, candidly, you want as little LLM as possible because that's going to introduce noise in what you're working. And so we have this kind of dichotomy of worlds. We have a new model come out and benchmarks, and oh my gosh, look how good it is. No one is building software that's just LLM output. Good luck. Hopefully that was the right piece. How are you bringing the right context? How are you bringing the right data? Audit controls, monitoring, governance, evaluation. All of these other pieces are how you build good software. And I think as a whole world, we've gotten so excited about the LLMs. In some cases, people have forgotten about kind of good software development to kind of actually build high quality systems.
One, I think that importantly highlights kind of a common misconception I sometimes hear where folks confuse the model with the actual end user application, right? There's so many other ways to use these models besides a consumer-facing chatbot, whether you have a model selection or not. I mean, we don't have people typing prompts into our software when they're getting a summary, right? You need to build in consistent guardrails, consistent checks in regards to where the data is being pulled from, how you're using these different patterns, and then ultimately designing it into workflow so that an informed decision is being made in regards to what's being presented and that user has the opportunity to make the decision. And it's very, very different than the consumer experience most of us have on a day-to-day basis.
And well, I think this is important too because I think again the one-to-one interaction I think will have its limits. But then to your point, Justin, too, like as I think about the tools and the software and the things that we rely on that are deterministic, that are like a calculator, let's just say, like I still feel like there's a part of me, and I've said this before, but like I'd love to still abstract some of that away. And to your point, Seth, like I don't maybe need to use the model for the actual interaction for the answer I'm getting. I mean, I just need to go fetch the right tool to then retrieve
Yeah.
the answer or the piece of data. And that can be kind of again pushed back from my having to choose or set that up in advance. Like, and I guess maybe we're not quite there, but to me, there's a multi-agent story, there's a multi-tool story, there's a better together story where all the work that we've done for decades in traditional NLP and all the calculation risk scoring start to accrete additional value to having an agent that can get that information for me and save me time or mental effort, or whatever we use as the metric.
I feel like anybody that is continuing to push the bounds of using AI in new ways needs to simultaneously be as ready to push for not using AI when it's not needed. And sometimes that seems contradictory, but I think it's back to your point, the right tool for the right job. And this does provide a generalization framework that can be applied in a bunch of contexts, but that doesn't mean you should always use it.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and this leads to now what's now, because I feel like there's clearly going to be a continued slope of improvement, probably on a lot of tasks. Some of them may be healthcare of the models. They will be useful in applications. But I'm really curious to bring up some of the work that you all announced around specific models. So can we actually reevaluate the task and where the gaps might be in terms of, does natural language really get us to where we need to be in specificity for things like prediction, for longitudinal records, for the language of healthcare, which we can all agree is different than the natural language of the Reddit threads on internet that some of these models are trained on. And is there a way that we can take some of the lessons learned from this phenomenal technology and apply them with some domain expertise? And I think that's what you've done. And I don't know if Justin, you have some of the graphic from the paper that you all put out, but to me, this is like such a beautiful example of the NLP to GPT-2 story in healthcare. In other words, let's reconsider the problem of the language, the tokenization of actually the language of healthcare. Let's think about the fact that things happen on different time scales and consider that, right? In the events in someone's progression through a health system. And then let's think about the prediction task that we've spent decades in medical AI, right? Trying to do prediction models. And can we actually learn the language, hopefully get economies of scale, hopefully get the scaling laws to tell us this is the right direction, and eventually have a generalist model that can speak the language of healthcare truly, and then also predict events in ways that can help us truly advance the field. Anyway, I'm so excited about this work. I don't know if you have other insights that you got from building this model, but this is such a powerful statement that just came out of the UGM meeting, really thinking critically, marrying the domain expertise with the scaling laws and the things we've learned from LLMs.
I think there's sort of a fun historic digression here as we get into this that's maybe worth highlighting. Do either of you know where the name Epic came from? Have I shared this?
I don't
So
think
I do.
it actually, and Matt, you're going to appreciate this, is with your English background here. It's actually the classic Greek poems. Um, and these long stories. And in fact, when Judy initially developed the first capabilities for Epic, which was the database that managed the data around the patient, she called it Chronicles. We still
huh.
use that name today. And so this idea of a patient story sort of been inherent in the company from day one. Um, and the approach we took here was really, could we, using things like medical events, interventions, observations, and I think a critical component here, and you see it in gray, time that intervals that have passed, use that in a chronological order to build out the story of a patient, and then take that same transformer architecture that we've been seeing in natural language be so useful at predicting next word from a training perspective and apply that here. And as you noted, it's early. Um, at the same time, the data set we've trained the largest model on so far is about 8 billion encounters. So it's not small, but based on the scaling laws that we found in the paper, there's a lot of opportunity to continue to improve these models by growing them and then exposing them to more patient stories. And the Cosmos community, this is an effort across health systems that use the Epic software to build out a large de-identified data set for these purposes, is 2 to 3 times that size, depending on how you measure it. So there's a lot of opportunity here. I think the sort of exciting thing, kind of a couple of exciting things that I'll just highlight, at least to me. One, we have evidence that this model seems to be able to not just predict near-term events that might be, for example, what gets ordered or resulted during an upcoming encounter, but also seems to be equally applicable out 3, 5, 10 years in regards to predictions, which can obviously help in regards to managing chronic diseases, but also things like some of the capacity problems that health systems are facing right now in regards to getting patients beds and those sorts of things. Happy to dive into other pieces. I think the kind of visibility of the simulation of what gets simulated, those future trajectories, will be interesting to explore from a UX perspective going forward as well. But we're just, I think, scratching the surface as a community on how these new modalities can be used. I know I threw a lot out there. Sorry. I'm excited thank you, Matt, for the kind words, but it's been great to work with the team at Yale, Andrew and Daniela, who's on the Cosmos Governing Council, as well as some of your colleagues at Microsoft, to get this initial research out. So.
It is amazing, and it fits in this world of, right, healthcare is different. It's a different language that we're talking about, and it's amazing just to see the push on the research side. I'm curious, Seth, as you brought up, the other pieces on UX, how physicians, patients, others will start to interact with AI systems. There was another paper, and I'll actually bring up one more chart that's actually gotten a lot of attention over the past few weeks, which is around, de-skilling of users with AI. And Matt, I don't know if you have any more comments you want to talk here as the practicing physician, but between the three of us. But at large, I think, like, I felt like I saw this and was like, yeah, it makes sense. You have a physician rely on AI a bunch for imaging. You take that away. By the way, maybe they weren't as good as it before. You talk about the calculator example. You want to push all of us on mental math with three digit numbers. If you don't use it, you are going to lose it. And so, like, I don't know if Matt, you have any comments, and then Steph starting to think through, like, how are you thinking about this? How are you thinking about UI, UX as you're thinking about development now at Epic?
I think this brings up a couple concepts. I think, I mean, this has been true in healthcare. So I guess the point of the paper, which I think is valid, which is that, physicians are using this AI for colonoscopy, for polyp detection. It's quite good. As it shows that they do potentially better with the software. And then you take the software away and you have them do the same tests and they do less good, right? It seems like it's close, but you can see that this makes perfect sense. Everyone has stopped using maps to get around. I'm old enough to have had to do that before GPS, and I just use GPS. And then there's medical examples, right? Like, I haven't tapped out a patient's pleural effusion since a med school, physical exam rotation, because why? We have x-rays and we have, ultrasound, and we have all kinds. So there are lots of examples. At the same time, I mean, it does raise a question. I think there's the 2 points that I think that we still haven't solved. One is, what are the what are acceptable areas in healthcare that we're willing to be okay with the deskilling? Like, what are there just things that we're just going to say we cede to the technologies where it needs to be maturity wise, we can use it reliably. This is the way we do things now. But the other part of that, which I think is still unsolved and that's related, is the human computer interaction, or probably some new term, probably human AI interaction. Like, what is that ultimate combo? And how do you have to display it to me so that we're better together? And we've had this narrative, Justin, through the several episodes, which is, I need to see that human plus AI is better than either alone. And if not, a system where, which I think there's been some papers on now, how do we divvy up the work between the human and the AI so that again, in aggregate, they're better. And those are just unsolved, but very important questions. And the papers like this are starting to tease at that a bit more.
I think you're highlighting this sort of, if I look forward 20 years, I guess I'm curious. I imagine we're all in agreement on this, but if not, we should have that discussion. But I feel like if we look forward 20 years, the quality of care we'll be able to provide, I think, is going to be unequivocally better. I think we're going to have more real world evidence at the point of care. It'll be more personalized. There will be a new set of tools that folks will be able to use and have at their disposal in addition to what they have today to do that. If either of you disagree, I mean,
Well, no, well, the only thing I disagree with is that we never on this show we only go as far as 5 years out because no, I'm just kidding.
yeah, I agree. It's hard to. I agree, generally speaking, and we could debate the time frame. I don't have a clear definition there, but I think that the question in my mind is how do we move through this interim state? There is things we need to learn, and frankly, I feel this in the same way in regards to the developers I work with at the company. There's a similar question in regards to vibe coding tools and experiences. And I see developers now walk in the door where it would have been a PowerPoint presentation in regards to UX experience. They now have a functioning prototype in the same amount of time. And frankly, it looks better than their poor PowerPoint skills did before. And we're better able to understand it. Now, not everybody's up to that state yet. And I think there's this sort of interim piece we need to move through. And I think it applies equally to medicine as it does to development, as an example.
Yeah, the vibe coding is such an interesting example. All of our MBAs, and I still teach a bunch, they are now expected, instead of slides, they are now expected to show up with working prototypes, working demos. It's just
Right.
a different way, and it's so much more powerful, right, to communicate, right? That when you can say not just, hey, here's the concept and these are the 3 bullet points I want. Like, no, you can touch and feel this is what we're working at. Granted, very, very different than functioning software in the real world for all the kind of reasons we've talked about.
Right.
But the communication is totally different. Uh, and then Seth, to your point on yeah, 20 years is far too long. And I think that is where it does get really interesting, though, is really at what time scale are these changes going to start to happen? And the fascinating thing we've been discussing is there's this balance between patients are kind of going now. Again, for better or worse, patients are kind of going now to these consumer tools. And for all of us who work closely with health systems, who think about this on the other side, how do we as a field feel about balancing these imperfect tools to have people keep up or educate or change how patients are interacting with it? And that's just this separate debate, because I think Seth, I think your 20-year answer is easy. I think the answer is undoubtedly yes. It's just, is it 6, 12 months, 24 months, but 5 years, to Matt's point, where how do we navigate as a field through it?
Well, and so last week was our user group meeting, and here in Verona in Wisconsin, one of the things we spent time talking about was a collection of work we're doing, both in my chart, the patient facing application. Most folks just have it on their iPhone. They're doing things like getting lab results or scheduling an appointment, those sorts of things, checking on their kids' growth charts, that sort of thing in it. And then the physician facing experience in the office, as an example. And part of what we were talking about there was that there's an opportunity in an integrated set of software to be able to kind of answer those consumer questions that are starting to be asked, but grounded both in one, their medical record, their family history, that information that is in the chart, so you can have more confidence in that piece. And then secondly, and I think this may be even more important, bluntly, the opportunity to hand off from that experience to the care team. to engage a nurse, to engage a provider, and to escalate that conversation to somebody else that can intervene if necessary in that context, and be able to do so seamlessly and go back and forth. And we tried to highlight the importance of that. I think of it as two sides of the same coin, right? One side is facing the patient, and the other side is facing the care team. And there needs to be a consistent dialogue between those two with grounding in this sort of rich history of the medical record.
I love this so much. And just again, there's always that classic thing in healthcare, as our time to see our patients and discuss their care shrinks and the pressure on all the pressures around that. But there's always that famous, I mean, everybody's gone through med school has this like, you know, Marcus Welby kind of old school doc that'll tell you the only question the patient actually came in to ask you will be asked once your hand touches the door to leave the next appointment. And it's often the most gnarly, complicated question, right? And it's just it's good, it's without fail. And to me, when you're talking about someone who's both getting more educated about their own data and they're asking the right questions, whatever. But then they're teeing that up for the, I mean, that's such a beautiful connection to me because now I have a way better understanding of what are the things I really need to deal with in this visit that without that information, I'm just going to assume refill a couple meds and make sure that you're up on your screening. And then all of a sudden it actually ends up being this whole other thing, right? But that communication is so key. And I think that we talk about this a lot too, but this idea of information asymmetry between the physician and the patient, that goes both directions, by the way. Yes, physicians are knowledgeable about their field and the things that they do, and the patients may not be as up to speed. But on the other side, I am at a disadvantage about all the data that I have about you as a patient and all the things that are troubling you when you're not in my office. Like that, can we level the playing field on both sides? I think that's a phenomenal future vision.
For 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 any listeners that happen to be at Tuesday morning of our user group meeting, and just heard what Matt said, he did not share that idea before what you saw on Tuesday happened. What we shared uh, was a MyChart experience where the conversation with the patient through MyChart pre-visit build out a visit agenda, including double checking for that last hand on the doorknob moment. And then the screen flipped and they were in the exam room and the visit, part of what we're building towards is a real-time experience driven by the conversation in the exam room that then walks through that visit agenda and brings insights, including real-world evidence from Cosmos, into the exam room based on that conversation in the exam room and that kind of pre-visit experience that already teed up the visit agenda exactly to that point, Matt. It's one example, but I think it helps highlight how there's sort of so many new modalities that can come into play with these different models when put into workflow and a user experience that makes sense and connects the patient and the care team.
I love it. And I will confirm that I unfortunately did not get to see the presentations there, but to me, like these are the kinds of things though that I think if you grabbed, Dr. Smith off the street in anywhere USA, they'd be like, oh, that seems like it's so far away, honestly. And this kind of goes back to just the general theme, which is that you almost have to just really say, in a perfect world, a magic wand, what would you want the perfect visit to look like from both sides? And see how far really you are away from that technologically, and could you, because I don't think, again, with that overhang, that we're that far away from being able to do these things at scale today or in the shorter term without having to say, sure, guys, but it's 5 to 10 years away. I think it's much more near term than that, right?
Well, it is. It certainly is. And I think an important aspect of this is that the incremental steps to get there each add both value in regards to time saved for physicians, as well as a better experience for patients and improve the quality of care. So you can step into this type of experience and incrementally get there because there are some of these are more complicated and we need to continue to both drive down latency in regards to how these model responses on a technical side and other aspects in regards to doing this at scale. And there's But that work's underway. It's going to happen to your point. And so there's a real chance to quickly step into this type of experience.
Well, I don't even know how we top this. I mean, we just talked about an entirely new patient physician interaction. It's coming. I guess the only debate we have or the difference of opinion is when. Um, but I guess Seth, one last. Was there anything else? Obviously, yeah, we glossed over it, but Epic UGM, one of the biggest kind of events people eyes on watching in healthcare. Was there anything we missed that we should have spoken about here as our listeners are thinking about, the future of healthcare AI and what's coming next?
I I think one thing that's important not to lose sight of, and we've hit multiple times, obviously, on the importance of this patient-physician experience and helping everybody be better informed and efficient in that context at the same time. There's also a lot of challenges facing the health systems. And I think, you know, that is a societal question as well. There are not enough physicians. We have an aging demographic that is going to continue to put increased pressure on society in this regard. And I think the types of things we're talking about help there, help with access challenges, help with, even if it's as simple as helping answer billing questions in my chart with an agent, right? Um, I think we need to continue to keep a beat on, and this was sort of the third theme that we touched on at UGM, making sure that continues to scale meaningfully as well. Um, it's maybe not as directly applicable when Matt walks into the exam room, and understandably so, but I think it is something that we all need to continue to keep a beat on together.
I love it. And I think that we I'm sure most of our listeners who are health have a healthcare background know this, but for those who don't, the Epic UGM conference or event is, think of like Apple, Worldwide Developer I mean, it's literally like I mean, people lining up, right? I mean, this is a big moment. So kudos to you all for pulling this community together. I think there's a lot of productive conversations that come out of just beyond what Epic specifically is doing. And I think that the level of discourse has been, accelerated forward. I think a lot having to do with the way that you are positioning the technology in a very much a healthcare landscape, thinking about each of the stakeholders and where we should be headed next. So thank you for all the great work, Seth, and really thanks. Such a pleasure to have you on.
Oh, I've enjoyed it. Thanks for inviting me on, and we'll have to do it again sometime.
I want you to come with your turtleneck next time with holding up
Well,
the next big device or something next time you're on. That's all I ask.
something to do, something to aim for.